Well, apparently, we know why Ben Johnson decided to stay in Detroit. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to a video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, man, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news. And we got this awesome news yesterday. It was reported yesterday that Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, was returning to Detroit for this upcoming season. And man, I was pumped, okay? We did the video over here. I know a lot of fans were super excited about this. I felt like this was one of the biggest dominoes this offseason outside of, there's always players coming in, players going out, free agent signings, extensions. But to be honest, I thought maybe the biggest domino that was going to take place wasn't going to be about the free agents that we sign, or more so about the extensions, to be honest, but it was really going to be about the coaching staff. And Ben Johnson decided to come back to Detroit, and we were all pumped about this. I'm pretty sure I could speak for almost every single Lions fan that they were fired up to hear this news. And honestly, for Washington fans, they probably weren't super excited. Now, that job is still open as of the time of recording this. That's what we're waiting on. Seattle hiring Mike McDonald takes them off the list. So now it's about Washington. And again, Aaron Glenn, it seems like he's in a running for that potential head coaching job. Also, it seems like Dan Quinn is as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on what happens there. We're still waiting to figure out what's going to happen with Aaron Glenn. And of course, some of the other assistant coaches as well. However, Amon-Ra St. Brown spoke on the situation of Ben Johnson, and there was a report that was put out there on X today, and it was according to Adam Schefter, one day ago, and it's according to Adam Schefter that said this: Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson has 2 years remaining on his contract in Detroit. His deal was not adjusted to stay, per league source, proving that money is not Johnson's biggest motivation. The Lions still could opt to adjust the contract down the line, but it's not the reason that Johnson returned to Detroit today. Johnson is loyal. So that's what we heard. All right, that's what we heard from Adam Schefter. And I was like, wait a minute, so it's not about the money. Because yesterday, I didn't want to, speak for the guy. I don't know what his motivations are, right? I was hoping that it was kind of the view of like, there is unfinished business. We were right here. Whatever it was, I was just excited to have the guy back, whatever that motivation may be. But we get that report. And then today, Amon-Ra St. Brown speaks on Ben Johnson returning to Detroit, and this is what he had to say. Johnson called him on Tuesday morning and said he was returning because he has more work to accomplish within the organization. They're trying to get to the Super Bowl after going to the NFC Championship game and just literally being right there to winning that NFC Championship game, being up 17 points at halftime. And then, I guess according to Amon-Ra St. Brown, immediately he texted Jared Goff when he found out the news from Ben Johnson to tell Jared Goff about the news that Ben Johnson was returning. Now, Jared Goff was asked about this a little bit earlier in the week, and I understand why he answered like he did, because they were like, well, some people think that if Ben Johnson's not here, maybe you're not the same guy. And he's like, well, they said the same thing when I was in LA too. So I loved a little shot. All right, I think you need a little bit of that swagger, cocky but confidence. You got to have a little bit of that. And I think Jared Goff has built some of that here since joining the Detroit Lions, some of the success that he's had. I think he's built up a little bit of that swagger, and I think that's necessary for him to play at his best. And man, he had a really strong playoff run for the Lions, as well as, of course, regular season. But St. Brown continued like this. I'm like, so what's up with you? You did an interview. Like, are you leaving? St. Brown said. He's like, you know what? I'm on my way to the facility right now. This is Ben Johnson. I'm on my way to the facility right now. He said he couldn't sleep last night. He said there's unfinished business. He wants to stay. So that's according to Amon-Ra St. Brown on why he decided to come back to Detroit. He said his heart is in Detroit. He wants to stay. He told me that while he was on his way to the facility. So Ben Johnson was going to the facility, and he could not sleep. And I guess according to St. Brown, it was because, man, there is unfinished business. We left it out there. And as we know, Ben Johnson announced this. I don't know that he was going to get the job in Seattle or Washington. I think that obviously he was qualified for that. I thought he would at one of those spots if he wanted it. And he stepped out. It was like he was set for interviews on Monday and Tuesday. He's like, you know what? I'm going back to Detroit. Did the same thing last year. So we were wondering, because of some of the reports that were also out there, is this a financial thing? Was he asking for too much money? And again, all of these things could play a factor in this for sure. I definitely can understand that. But reportedly, according to Adam Schefter, at least as of a day ago, it wasn't like he came back because the Lions said, okay, you know what, here's this huge new contract that we're going to offer you. He came back because it's unfinished business. And I think, like we touched on yesterday, what's so important about this is the culture that the Lions have. From top down, you have stability. And it's about the people that you work with, right? I don't want to speak for him, but I do think in general, it is important about the people that you surround yourself with. When you're talking about long-term, having success, being happy, it is about the people. And from the outside looking in, man, you got the right people that's leading Detroit right now. And Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, that front office, Mike Disner, Sheila Hamp leading it all. You have the right people leading this organization. And as Lions fans, man, we're just more hungry, I think, after this. I'm on to the draft, but now it's so like, yo, let's go win this dang Super Bowl. We're more than capable of getting there. Like, we can not only compete with anybody, we can win this darn thing. And I think that's what it proved to everybody. And I think after Ben Johnson saw that, he's like, yo, I can leave, right? Maybe he'll get an opportunity, but we got something to do here. What Ben Johnson has done here so far with the Detroit Lions statistically, I mean, all the numbers are really pretty good offensively. You can see it here with the rushing stats and also the points. What stands out to me, this is situationally, we've been really good with Ben Johnson, as well as you've also seen consistency in the red zone, which is something I think Aaron Glenn brought up this year that, you know, they had done the data behind it, that these things usually aren't consistent. Well, with Ben Johnson, the last 2 years, Lions have been great in the red zone. Obviously, the run game has been there. There's a lot of that has to do with the personnel the Lions have specifically on the offensive line. They have a very strong offensive line. But then it's also what Jared Goff has been with Ben Johnson. Like, look, the dude could play regardless of if Ben Johnson was here or not, but Ben definitely helps. All right, this guy's creativity offensively, the heavy personnel usage. I love his game plans, man. Every time I step back, I'm like, man, I didn't even think of something like that. Like, if I see what their tendency is to do, like this is kind of the coverage they like to lean in, maybe they're a blitz-heavy team, whatever that may be, right? Or like, I'm like, pick on this guy. It's Ben Johnson who then takes it a step further. San Fran, very easy example. Like the pitch counters that they were running, I never even thought of that. Like you understand like how you'd like to attack him, but then this guy has a little wrinkle to it. He's got a little more flavor to what you're expecting. Obviously his creativity we've seen over the years now is just completely outside of the box. I mean, the guy has some plays that you're just like, I've never seen that before. Best one, for example, would be the screen that we literally lateraled back that took off against Green Bay nearly for a first down. It set up the game-sealing play because of the huge chunk that we picked up, which initially had us way backed up. Creativity there, even against San Fran, you know, the flea flickers, the throwback passes that didn't connect, but you still saw some of that creativity. And I would also say the big thing that stands out to me has been the detail within this offense, okay? And don't give all this to Ben Johnson. You know, you definitely have to keep in mind the quarterback coaching as well. Mark Brunell, it sounds like he's outstanding. From what others have said about working with Mark Brunell, how good he is as a quarterback's coach. Statistically speaking, for Jared Goff, his numbers, especially this year, took another step forward. He was great in the playoffs. He was great statistically in the season. And obviously, they've really leaned into his strength, right? Middle field passing as a quarterback. They've leaned into what he does well. 3-step drop, put it up, right? They're not forcing him to consistently do things that he's not comfortable with, and that's the challenge. That's every quarterback, right? You play the guy to their strength, and I think he's really opened that up. Also, you throw along kind of just the players that they've added to open that up, right? The way that they've found a role for Jameson Williams, and when it's initially here, you're like, I don't know if this guy's going to work. Like, there was people questioning if J-Mo was going to work in Detroit just because of what his route tree we've seen and how Jared Goff's skill set matches that. Yet, as the season goes on, slowly but surely, here comes Jameson. Obviously, he's had to improve as well, but then you're also seeing, again, asking him on to run the dig routes. Hey, you want to take a shot? Let's get the ball out quickly to him, right? We're seeing him on some of the double moves. You saw him on the deep post against Dallas. So those things have to be set up, but there's still value there in the run game as well, right? The trickery, the way that we've gotten him involved in this attack. But I love it's the route detail. It's the timing when you watch this offense, right? It's like when you see a guy set up a route or release one direction to allow something else to set up, allow the stack to work. Obviously, how motion heavy they are. They do it with their offensive linemen, 6th offensive lineman looks that we see, which for the most part works out, unless, you know, for some reason they say the wrong guy reported eligible. But he does an outstanding job with that, all the movement pre-snap, depending on the defense that he's playing, play how they want to play in coverage and how he can exploit that. And not to say everything's been perfect. There's been ups, there's been downs, but I've also consistently seen growth. Like, you look at Dallas, I didn't think Dallas was our best performance as an offense against a really good switch man heavy team, and that's still an area that I think we have to continue to improve and get the players and make the plays that are out there. But at the same time, you know, when you see more teams that then play that as the season goes on, you're still like, oh, this game plan is actually better. This looks better from what the Lions just saw. It's like they improved from this. Brian Flores, the success that they had against Flores in that Minnesota defense, not the most stacked defense, but it was a guy that in the past Goff had like no success against, and all of a sudden this year it's like, hey, this is a really nice plan, right? Even to the San Fran game, the way that they just planned that game, right? The whole game plan, and it has to be in sync with the head coach. And that's what the Lions have really going well, I think, between Ben and Dan right now, is they're very much so in sync, right? It's like, hey, we're going 4-down territory here, so let's run it on this play. Let's give it to St. Brown here. This is 4-down territory. Let's do this. Not to say there's never any mistakes. Even as specific as, like, hey, let's get Jahmyr Gibbs more involved in the passing attack. Like, that was something that I wanted to see for weeks, and it took a minute, but they finally started to utilize him there really towards the end of the season. We saw it against Tampa Bay, and then I was like, oh, there's some other things open here on film. And then all of a sudden you get to, you know, our last game against San Fran, we missed him in the end zone, but you had him open. It was like, okay, now we're utilizing him a little bit. It's awesome. We're starting to utilize him. So there are things that maybe they come along. You have to learn, but it feels like once they get something that they pick up and like, we like this, then they stick to it. You know, I think 2022 and some of the run schemes, some of the, you know, toss plays they would run, pulling their tight end from the opposite side with the short motion pre-snap, or I shouldn't say short motion, but the cross motion, fast motion. And it was those little things where then they could carry it into the next week. And as they learned, you would just start to see those
elements implemented into their offense against certain matchups. So there's still things that they're picking up and they're learning and they're figuring out, but you can truly see the growth and this offense just evolve as things go on.
It's not like everything again is
downs.
perfect. One thing I love about Ben is his ability to recognize what a team's tendency is and attack it based on specific downs, which is why I think his red zone and goal line offense is so darn consistent, as well as third down, some of the big plays we pick up on third and long. Yet at the same time, I also understand that, yeah, that's not always going to work. You know, you see the San Fran, the second, fourth down, nobody's open. That's not something that's completely new. You know, them shifting out of a zone coverage and away from their tendency on that play and taking everything away because we had a man beater for it. That happened earlier this season. It just wasn't on that big of a stage, and it wasn't the same necessarily result of like, oh, you just gave the other team the ball. I think it may have been a turnover actually on that play. We may have fumbled. I think it was against Green Bay, but we've seen it before. Like, it's happened where you expect one thing and you get something different. But that's also just the nature of it. More often than not, Ben Johnson has really good sense on the team's scheme and what their tendencies are based on down and distance, and that's why the numbers are so good consistently.
The only thing I didn't like is that they didn't have a second play and they had to use a timeout. Not to say everything is going to be perfect, but for the most part, they seem to be on the same page with play calling based on down, based on situation, and that's huge. And I think they really play off each other well in that sense that Ben Johnson's willing to kind of play that aggressive approach, and he knows how to set up the aggressive play calling, man. So obviously, Dan, with the trickery, we have really good assistant coaches, but Ben's been incredible. Statistically, creativity, improvements versus seeing one coverage to the next and having to kind of adapt to it, playing into the players that he actually has available, missing offensive linemen, moving the offensive line, playing into golf strengths. The numbers speak for themselves. I don't really need to explain Ben Johnson and why he's so great, right? We do it all year, but he's great, and I'm glad that he is back. Thank you for coming back, Ben. Let's get this thing rolling. This makes me optimistic, really, because, again, this was one of the biggest dominoes. I'm super confident in the way that we're structured to continue to build this roster, but the coaching staff was the big questions. Now that he's back, watch out, NFL.